A stormy night, a forgotten road, and a German shepherd standing guard over something no one else dared to approach. His eyes burned with loyalty, his body scarred by trials that would have broken any other. When a stranger finally crossed his path, the truth hidden in those shadows began to unravel, a truth that would test courage, reveal betrayal, and change everything about what it means to protect. What secret was this shepherd holding on to with his last ounce of strength? Stay with the story to find out. Max's body stiffened before Olivia even registered the change in air. The German shepherd, 70 pounds of sinew and scars, froze mid-stride on the gleaming Walmart floor. His ears pricked forward. His chest swelled. Then came the sound, a low, guttural growl that seemed to rise from some ancient place inside him. Olivia Carter felt the vibration of it in her ribs. She had heard Max growl before in alleys reeking of blood in burned-out warehouses where trafficked children had been locked away. But this sound, this subterranean tremor, was different. It was the kind of sound that cut through noise and reached marrow. Heads turned instantly. Mothers clutching toddlers. Teenagers pushing carts heavy with soda and chips. An old man halting by the end cap stacked with bleach. Max's growl thickened, rolled into sharp barks, explosive, relentless. The noise ricocheted off fluorescent ceilings and metal shelves until it filled every corner of the store. Olivia's hand shot to the leash at her belt. Too late. Max lunged forward, claws scraping furrows across the linoleum. He was not going for a suspect, not searching under racks of clothing, not sniffing a backpack. He hurled himself at a decorative mirror propped innocently in the home decor section, barking with a violence that rattled the glass in its frame. Max. Olivia's voice cracked like a whip, the practiced command of 15 years on the force. The dog ignored her. In 3 years of partnership, he had never disobeyed a direct order. Never. Not once. Her stomach dropped. Customers shrieked. Someone's phone clattered to the ground. 2 toddlers began to cry, the sound fragile against Max's furious roars. Olivia felt the weight of every gaze fall on her. Detective Olivia Carter badge at her hip, service weapon heavy against her thigh, auburn hair streaked with premature silver, pulled into the same severe ponytail she had worn since her daughter vanished 10 years ago. To strangers, she looked composed. Inside, her pulse jackhammered. Max's body trembled like a struck tuning fork. He slammed his paws against the base of the mirror claws, shrieking against wood. He dug as if the tiled floor were loose soil, as if he could tear through to whatever hid beyond. Unit 29 disturbance at Walmart Supercenter. The radio crackled at her shoulder. Dispatch calling her own location. 30 seconds felt like 30 years. Olivia couldn't breathe. She knew this behavior, knew it from one memory she could never erase, the day Max had led officers to a cellar where 3 missing siblings had been locked away. He hadn't barked for drugs, not for explosives, only for children. Her chest tightened. Please, God, no, not again. Detective, a nervous voice at her shoulder. The store manager appeared, a man in his 50s. Khaki uniform, wrinkled, wire-rimmed glasses sliding down his damp nose. His name tag read, Richard Hale. His eyes darted from the mirror to Max's teeth, then to Olivia. Your dog. He's upsetting customers. Olivia studied him. Sweat blooming despite the air conditioning. A twitch at the corner of his left eye. Years of interrogations had taught her to read people. This man radiated panic like heat from asphalt. How long has this mirror been here? She asked flatly. Hale blinked. Mirror months. Since we renovated the home decor aisle. Look, officer, if your animal is having some kind of episode. Max's bark cut him off louder than before, primal enough to rattle the nerves of every shopper still lingering. Olivia's voice hardened. Clear this area now. You can't just now. Authority landed heavy in the air. Staff began ushering customers away. Shopping carts squeaked hastily toward exits. Within seconds, the aisle was empty except for Olivia Hale and Max, who pressed his muzzle against the mirror's edge and whined a sound so raw, Olivia felt it in her bones. That whine. She had heard it once before. The day they found 6 children hidden under a basement on Elm Street. A sound of urgency, grief, and pleading all at once. Olivia's throat constricted. She crouched, running her fingers along the mirror's frame. Smooth wood until there, a seam almost imperceptible. Her breath caught. This mirror isn't mounted. It's covering something. Hale's face blanched. I wouldn't know. I just manage sales. Olivia keyed her radio. This is Detective Carter, Unit 29, requesting backup at Walmart Supercenter Route 22. Possible concealed evidence. Bring crime scene. Unit 29, clarify nature of emergency K9 alert. Strong. Request Detective Morrison and tech team. Max pawed harder, scraping splinters from the frame. His amber eyes burned with intensity. His entire body strained forward, leash-taut muscles quivering. He was telling her, as clearly as words, "They're here. Right behind this." Olivia's heart hammered. 10 years of searching for Sophia. 10 years of walking into stores scanning children's faces for the impossible. 10 years of hope curdling into obsession. And now Max, this dog who had never lied to her, screamed the truth at a piece of furniture in the middle of Walmart. She wanted to tear it down with her bare hands. Sirens wailed faint in the distance. Minutes later, the front of the store was cordoned off, yellow tape slicing through fluorescent air. Detective Henry Morrison arrived, face weathered, skeptical, until he saw Max. The dog had gone utterly still, nose pressed to the mirror, body vibrating with tension. "What do we got?" Morrison asked. Max hit on the mirror. "There's a seam, not decorative, hiding something." Morrison leaned close with a flashlight, tracing the barely visible line. His expression shifted, jaw tightening. "Son of a bitch." Hale swallowed hard, fumbling his phone. I'll have to call corporate for schematics." "Funny," Morrison interrupted, not looking up. "Most managers know every inch of their building." Olivia barely heard them. Her attention was locked on Max. The dog's ears twitched, nose quivering, every ounce of him concentrated. She recognized that focus. It always came seconds before revelation. Her palms were damp. She had trained herself not to hope not after Sophia. But Max's certainty dragged her into dangerous territory. If he was right, there were children behind that mirror. Alive or dead, she didn't know. Morrison straightened. "We'll need a warrant, then move fast," Olivia snapped. Her voice broke with urgency she couldn't disguise. "If Max is signaling this hard, every minute counts." Time folded in on itself. An hour later, Judge Coleman signed the warrant. Crime scene techs assembled saws and crowbars. The store emptied of customers, leaving silence thick enough to choke on. Olivia stood with Max pressed against her thigh. His breathing shallow, his eyes locked on the mirror as if sheer will could dissolve it. She felt his pulse through the leash, fast and furious. He was ready. Morrison approached with tools. "Tech team confirms void behind wall. You ready?" Olivia's throat was dry. She managed a nod. The first slice of the sawzall screamed across drywall. Dust plumed acrid and gray. Max surged forward, restrained only by Olivia's grip. He whined deep and low. The smell that seeped from the opening was faint but unmistakable to him. His body language screamed it. Urgency, fear, life. Olivia's heart thundered. The cut widened. A sliver of blackness appeared, a narrow corridor stretching into unseen distance. "Jesus Christ," Morrison breathed. Max pressed closer, trembling with restraint. He looked back at Olivia, eyes bright, unblinking. "Follow me. Trust me." Olivia tightened her grip on the leash, her own body trembling. She had lived 10 years without Sophia. 10 years of empty rooms, of birthdays missed, of nightmares replaying. Every child she saved felt like redemption, like penance. And now Max was telling her that beyond this wall was another chance. Her voice was steady when she spoke, though inside she shook apart. "I'm going in first." Morrison cursed. "Like hell. We don't know what's down there. Max does." Max's paw slid forward, claws scratching concrete, gaze never leaving the void. Olivia knew that posture. Urgency, not fear. Hope, not rage. The opening widened. Dust thickened. A gust of air wafted out, damp chemical tinged with something metallic that made Olivia's stomach knot. She lifted her flashlight beam, slicing through darkness. A narrow hallway, 30 feet, lined with cheap paneling, turning left at the far end. Max surged once more, the leash straining. His whine shifted higher, keening. The sound of discovery of life detected. Olivia's pulse spiked. Children. There were children down there. Central Morrison radioed, voice grave. "We've breached concealed wall. Request additional units and medical standby." Olivia hardly heard. She was staring into the dark, Max pulling like a force of nature. Behind her eyes, Sophia's smile flickered. The gap-toothed grin, the strawberry ice cream, the butterfly notebook left behind. 10 years gone. But here now Max was telling her the hunt was not over. Olivia squeezed the leash. Her whisper was almost prayer. "Lead me, boy." Max lunged toward the dark, and Olivia followed. Max's breathing was sharp in Olivia's ear, a steady rhythm that kept her tethered as she stared into the darkness behind the mirror. The corridor waited. The smell waited. But for a beat too long, her body betrayed her, locking in place. Not because of what might be inside, but because the moment echoed with too many ghosts. Her brother's face flashed first. Michael Carter uniform, crisp grin, easy, the golden boy who carried their family's pride like a banner. The day he died replayed itself on loop, even when she didn't want it, bullets ripping through a warehouse full of trafficked children. Max pressed against his body, refusing to move for 17 minutes, while the fire spread. Olivia had arrived too late to say goodbye, only in time to hear Max howling a sound that had fused with her grief. When she inherited Max, he was broken. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't lift his head. Every afternoon at exactly 3:47 p.m. The time Michael's heart had stopped, Max had howled the sound, splitting the air like glass. Olivia had tried to command him into obedience. It hadn't worked. Eventually, she stopped commanding and just sat with him, letting the dog's grief braid into her own. 6 months of that. Then 6 more months of training before Max even acknowledged her voice. When he finally responded, when his amber eyes flickered with trust, she had felt something she hadn't felt since Sophia vanished to possibility. And Sophia, oh Sophia, 8 years old when she disappeared. Blonde hair tangled from soccer practice, a smile missing a tooth. Olivia had been parked outside the school late from a domestic call, watching the door. One moment Sophia was there, walking out with her butterfly backpack. The next gone. 10 years since. 10 years of leads dissolving like smoke. 10 years of waking in the middle of the night, certain she had heard her daughter call her name. Her marriage hadn't survived it. David, her husband, had lasted 2 years before retreating, unable to breathe inside a house that had turned into a shrine of loss. And here was Max again, paw pressed to hidden drywall body, vibrating with conviction. The past and present tangled until Olivia could hardly separate them. Was she chasing children inside this store, or chasing Sophia's ghost Olivia? Morrison's voice broke through her spiral. "Stay with me." She blinked hard. The aisle, the dust, The cordoned-off store, all of it snapped back into focus. Max barked once sharp, dragging her the rest of the way out of memory. She exhaled shakily. "I'm here." But the ghosts didn't leave. They followed her, as they always did. Later, back at headquarters, while waiting for the warrant to process Olivia, sat in the break room with a styrofoam cup of coffee she didn't taste. The hum of the vending machine filled the silence. Max lay at her feet, eyes half closed but ears twitching, body never fully at rest. She envied him. Even broken, he knew his purpose. Her fingers traced the rim of the cup. She remembered the first case after Michael's death. A toddler missing in the rain, his mother frantic. Max had ignored every command, bolted into a storm drain. Olivia had thought she'd lost him. Minutes later, he'd re-emerged, dragging the sobbing boy to safety. She had collapsed in the mud, then gripping the boy with one arm, Max with the other. It had been the first time in years she had cried with something like relief. That was when she realized Max didn't need her to command, he needed her to believe. But believing came with a price. Every time he alerted her, heart clawed at the possibility of Sophia. Every time a child was found alive or dead, she lived two lives, celebrating for another family, grieving for her own. Coffee's cold. Morrison dropped into the seat across from her, his file folder thick with paperwork. His eyes softened slightly. "You okay?" Olivia wanted to laugh. "Okay." The word meant nothing anymore. She carried herself upright, badge-polished hair pulled tight. She looked okay. Inside, she was stitched together with threads that frayed more each year. She shrugged. "Max has never been wrong. That's what worries me." Silence stretched. She thought of Sophia's room at home, untouched, the walls still plastered with butterfly stickers. She thought of the unanswered birthday candles, the empty chair at every Thanksgiving. She pressed her palms together, as if in prayer, though she hadn't prayed in years. When the call came through, warrant approved, her chest tightened, not with relief, but with fear. Fear that behind that mirror was another set of children she couldn't save in time. Fear that the ghosts would multiply. Back at the store, the air smelled of drywall dust and fear. Richard Hale hovered near the customer service desk, his face pale, hands twisting. Olivia's eyes locked on him. Something about his fidgeting made her stomach churn. He looked less like a manager inconvenienced by police, more like a man about to be exposed. "Stay put," Morrison ordered Hale. Max tugged at his leash, dragging Olivia closer to the mirror as the text sliced deeper. The sound roared, echoing in Olivia's chest like the keening of memory. Each screech of metal on drywall was a countdown. Her thoughts tangled with Sophia again. She pictured her daughter behind that wall, hair tangled, eyes wide. She knew it wasn't possible. But the mind doesn't obey reason when it starves on absence. Carter Morrison's voice snapped, "Don't drift." "I'm fine." But she wasn't. She was split in two, Detective Carter, 30 years on the force, controlled, calculating, and Olivia, mother of a missing child, teetering on the edge of hope and despair. Max whined again. His eyes, when she met them, were fierce, anchoring. He had saved her before when she thought she would drown in grief. Maybe he could again. She crouched, pressed her forehead lightly to his, whispered so only he could hear, "Don't let me lose myself in this." Max's tail flicked once. Agreement. The saw broke through. A gust of stale air rolled out, heavy with disinfectant and something sour. Olivia's stomach lurched. Max strained, whining, high-pitched, desperate. The ghosts roared louder in her skull. Michael's last breath. Sophia's vanished footsteps. David's silence as he walked out the door. And beneath it all, Max's growl, ancient, relentless. Olivia drew her weapon. "We go in." Morrison cursed again. "You'll get yourself killed." "I've been dead for 10 years, she muttered. The corridor yawned open, dark and waiting. Max lunged forward, and Olivia let herself be pulled the ghosts at her heels. The hallway swallowed them whole. Paneling closed and soundproofed, suffocating. Olivia's flashlight beam shook as her hands trembled. Her throat closed around air that felt heavy with dread. Every nerve screamed retreat, but Max pulled unstoppable. His nails clicked fast on the floor, urgency in every movement. Olivia followed each step, a war between fear and need. 10 years of searching, 10 years of empty birthdays, 10 years of ghosts. Now maybe 10 years collapsing into this one corridor. Her heart beat so loud she barely heard the faint sound at the end of the hall. A rustle, a whisper, a child's voice impossibly small. Max froze, ears thrust forward, body quivering. Olivia's knees nearly buckled. The ghosts screamed. The present surged. She whispered her daughter's name before she could stop herself. Sophia. But the answer that came back wasn't Sophia. It was a different voice, thin and frightened, echoing through the dark. Help. Olivia closed her eyes, fighting the weight of everything she carried. This wasn't her child. But it was a child. And for now, that was enough. She opened her eyes, raised her flashlight, and let Max lead her deeper. The corridor was narrower than Olivia expected, just wide enough for her shoulder to graze the paneling when Max pulled too hard on the leash. The walls seemed to breathe, exhaling a stale mix of chemicals, dampness, and something metallic. Her flashlight beam trembled across the space, catching warped wood streaks of dirt and the occasional gouge that looked too much like fingernails. Max surged forward. His paws beat a frantic rhythm on the floor, nails clattering like clock hands counting down. Every movement was urgent, not exploratory. He wasn't sniffing for curiosity's sake, he knew. Slow down, Morrison hissed behind her. His voice bounced, muffled by the soundproof panels. He had his weapon drawn light, steady. A professional's calm, but Olivia could hear the tension tightening the edges. Olivia barely listened. She felt every tremor running through Max's body, every taut pull on the leash. Her partner wasn't just leading, he was dragging her toward a truth she wasn't sure she wanted to face. The hallway turned left. Max halted at the corner, ears pricked, nose twitching. His tail stood rigid, a spear of focus. Then he looked back at Olivia, eyes blazing. The unspoken command was clear, here. This is it. Olivia's mouth dried. Her hand tightened on her flashlight until her knuckles whitened. Her brain filled with static. 10 years of imagining Sophia behind every locked door, every basement, every darkened van. Now here she was again, heart roaring like a siren. She crouched, steadying herself. Easy, boy. We do this together. Max whined low and trembling, then surged around the corner. Olivia followed. The space opened suddenly. Her light swept across a room larger than she expected, 20 by 30 feet maybe. Her lungs stalled. Not storage, not renovations. Cells. 6 wooden compartments lined the far wall, each barely large enough for a mattress. Plywood barriers with small square cutouts at child height, secured with heavy slide bolts on the outside. Olivia's stomach knotted until bile burned her throat. Inside those cells, movement. Shadows recoiled from the light. Whispered voices overlapped, thin and frantic. Max whined again, pacing in tight circles before darting to one cell, nose pressed to the crack. His tail wagged once restrained as he whined higher, the sound he made when someone was alive inside. Olivia's heart collapsed into itself. She holstered her weapon, dropped to her knees. Hello. Her voice was softer than she'd ever heard it, barely above a whisper. My name is Detective Carter. I'm here to help. For a long, shattering second, silence. Then a small face appeared in one cut-out blue eyes, enormous in the dark. A girl. 7, maybe. Tangled blonde hair, cheeks hollow from hunger. Are you really police? Her voice rasped like old paper. Olivia's throat closed. She forced her voice steady. Yes, and this is Max. He's a good dog. He helps find people who are lost. The girl studied her gaze sharp with the suspicion of someone far older. She pressed closer to the window, whispering, "Mr. Bill said, police don't care about kids like us." Rage and grief collided in Olivia's chest. She wanted to slam the door open, drag Richard Hale down here, and make him face this child's words. Instead, she whispered, Mr. Bill was wrong. Police do care. I care. The girl blinked rapidly. My name's Lily. Olivia swallowed hard. That's a beautiful name. Lily, I need you to step back. I'm going to open the door. Her hands fumbled at the latch metal, biting her palms. It gave with sickening ease. The door swung open, creaking. Lily emerged slowly, her movements tentative as if expecting punishment for stepping too fast. Max lowered his body to the ground, ears soft, gaze gentle. Lily reached out trembling and touched his fur. The dog froze, then nudged his head against her hand. The child crumpled against him, sobbing soundlessly. Olivia's vision blurred. She blinked furiously. Not Sophia, not her daughter, but still a child, still worth every second of breath. Behind her, Morrison's voice was thick. Jesus Christ. Keep your light steady, Olivia snapped, voice raw. She moved cell to cell, sliding bolts, opening doors. Children emerged one by one, Emma red-haired and feverish with a rattling cough. Tyler clutching a battered teddy bear, refusing eye contact. Marcus, older protective, already trying to herd the younger ones like siblings. Two more twins clung together, eyes wide and silent. 6 in total, all alive, all fragile as glass. Emma swayed, coughing so hard, Olivia feared she would collapse. She's sick, Marcus said quickly. She needs help, please. Olivia's radio shook in her hand as she keyed it. Unit 29, 6 minors located approximate ages 6 to 12. 1 in medical distress. Request immediate paramedic entry. Static crackled back. Morrison added, voice grave. We've got a live scene. Repeat, 6 victims, long-term confinement. Secure perimeter. The children huddled around Olivia and Max, their thin shoulders brushing her legs, their eyes darting everywhere, but never far from the dog. Max lay down among them, calm, letting them touch his fur one by one. Even Tyler, after long hesitation, crept close enough to rest the corner of his teddy bear against Max's paw. Olivia knelt in the middle of them, her heart split clean in two. Relief because they were alive. Agony because they weren't Sophia. Detective Morrison murmured, eyes flicking toward the ceiling where footsteps echoed above. We need to move. This isn't over. She nodded numbly. Paramedics flooded in minutes later. Bright lights, gloves, medical bags thudding onto the floor. The children flinched, eyes wild. Olivia raised her hands quickly. It's okay. They're here to help. Emma wheezed as oxygen tubes were fitted. The twins were carried out wrapped in blankets. Marcus refused to let go of Lily's hand until Olivia pried his fingers free, promising she would follow. Through it all, Max never left. He paced beside each stretcher, nose-twitching posture taut. He checked every child before letting them go, as if personally signing off their safety. Olivia moved last, her body vibrating with adrenaline. She kept glancing back into the cells at the stuffed animals and blankets and crude drawings taped to walls. Each detail screamed of months, maybe years, of captivity. Each detail reminded her of the butterfly drawings still taped to Sophia's room at home. She swallowed bile. When she stepped back into the bright, sanitized chaos of Walmart, Richard Hale was waiting near the customer service counter, pale and silent between 2 officers. His hands were cuffed. His eyes darted to Olivia, then to Max. For a flicker, she saw something like panic twist into righteousness. "He's the one," Marcus blurted from his stretcher. His voice cracked, but was certain. "Mr. Bill." The words landed like gunfire. Olivia's vision tunneled. Her hand twitched toward her holster. Morrison caught her arm, grounding her. "We'll handle him by the book." By the book. Olivia wanted to burn the book. She forced herself to stand tall, heart pounding, as Hale was read his rights. His voice, when he finally spoke, was soft, almost tender. "I was protecting them." Olivia felt something inside her crack. Protecting. He dared to call this protection. Max growled low, the sound rolling through the fluorescent air, sharp enough to silence the chaos. The children on stretchers turned their heads. Even cuffed Richard Hale flinched. Olivia dropped to one knee, pressed her hand to Max's neck. His muscles thrummed like live wires. "Easy, boy. We've got them now." But she knew better. This was only the beginning. Hours later, the store was emptied. The mirrors stood shattered drywall, gaping. The once bright aisles were crime-scene corridors. Olivia walked through with Max at her side, flashlight beam, catching discarded toys, bloodied tissues, scraps of clothing too small. Every item pulled her deeper into memory: Sophia's stuffed rabbit, the one that still sat on her bed. Sophia's drawings folded into boxes in the attic. Sophia's absence filling every corner of her life. The children tonight had been saved. Their parents would hold them again. Olivia felt joy for them, real and fierce. But beneath it ran the old current of bitterness. Why not Sophia? Why never her Max pressed against her thigh, as if sensing the storm? His eyes were steady grounding. She knelt, buried her face against his fur, inhaled the musk of dog and dust and sweat. He stayed still, immovable, her anchor against ghosts. "We did good," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "Didn't we?" Max's tail thudded once, a solemn acknowledgement. But Olivia knew. Behind this mirror, they had uncovered only one layer of the truth. The real secret was bigger, darker. And Richard Hale's eyes, full of twisted conviction, told her they hadn't yet begun to scrape the bottom of it. The opening in the wall gaped like a wound, a jagged mouth inhaling the fluorescent light of the store and exhaling something older, colder, heavier. Olivia Carter stood at its edge, with Max pressed tight against her leg, the leash taut, her flashlight shaking faintly in her hand, though she forced her knuckles white around it to disguise the tremor. Morrison's muttered curses were muffled by the thick paneling that lined the hidden passage. But Olivia barely registered his words. Her pulse hammered so loudly that it filled her ears and drowned out everything except the sharp, steady breathing of the German shepherd beside her. Max leaned into the void, with his entire body muscles drawn tight, nose twitching, ears angled forward with precision, the leash vibrating with his urgency. He wasn't curious, he was certain, and his certainty was something Olivia had learned to treat as gospel. She stepped through before Morrison could object again. The floor beneath her boots coated with dust that lifted in ghostly puffs with each stride. The corridor was narrow-paneled with cheap boards layered over soundproof tiles, the kind used in recording studios, the kind meant to smother screams. The air was thick with dampness and chemicals, and underneath it clung the unmistakable musk of human fear, sharp and metallic in her throat, though she knew she couldn't smell what Max did. The dog surged ahead, nails striking a staccato rhythm that echoed up the passageway, his tail rigid, his head low, his movements clipped with a determination that admitted no hesitation. Olivia followed with her light, sweeping the beam, catching scratches etched into the paneling, long parallel lines that her mind immediately translated into fingernails, clawing for escape. She forced her breath steady, forced her legs forward because stopping meant drowning in the tidal wave of memory threatening to drag her under Sophia's face, Sophia's backpack, Sophia's empty room. The corridor stretched farther than it had looked from outside, each step a descent away from the clean brightness of the store above and deeper into a world designed for concealment. Morrison's light swayed behind her steadier than hers, but she could feel his frustration pressing at her back. He wanted to wait to coordinate to follow procedure. Olivia had lived too long inside procedures that ended with empty coffins and photographs taped to telephone poles. She had learned that when Max said now, the only sane answer was to move. At the bend, the passage angled left, the air shifting cooler, and Mac's froze body coiled like a spring. His ears pricked sharp, his nose lifted, his muscles quivered with the tension of barely restrained instinct. He looked back at Olivia, eyes catching the light burning with an intelligence she had come to depend on, more than her own. She raised her weapon in one hand, the flashlight in the other, her chest tight with dread and hope so tangled she couldn't tell one from the other. For an instant, she imagined Sophia's silhouette at the end of the hall. Imagined her daughter stepping forward 10 years older, but still recognizably hers. The hallucination burned bright enough to make her knees weaken, but Max's sudden lunge snapped her back into reality. They rounded the corner together, and the world opened into a chamber carved out of secrecy, and Olivia's stomach clenched at the sight. Wooden cells lined the far wall, each one barely large enough for a mattress. Each sealed with crude plywood, each fitted with a small square cutout, no larger than a child's face. Heavy slide bolts locked them from the outside bolts, easy for an adult, impossible for a child. The smell hit her then, unmistakable even to human senses. Unwashed bodies, stale food, the acrid sweetness of disinfectant layered too thick. Her flashlight beam swept across blankets crumpled in corners, across stuffed animals pressed against plywood, across drawings scrawled in crayon that clung desperately to childish hope. The sight buckled her knees. Max shot forward, nose pressed to one cell, whining high-pitched body vibrating with urgency. From inside came the faintest sound, the rustle of movement, the catch of breath. Olivia staggered closer, forcing her own breath, calm enough to speak. Her voice emerged raw, a whisper shaped by years of longing. "Hello. My name is Detective Carter. I'm here to help." For a moment there was nothing, silence thick as concrete. Then a pale face appeared in the square cutout framed by matted blonde hair, eyes impossibly large in the dim light. A girl, 7 maybe, voice thin and brittle. "Are you really police?" The word struck Olivia like a blade. She crouched until her face was level with the opening, fighting the quake in her voice. "Yes. This is Max. He's a good dog. He helps me find people who are lost." The child's gaze flicked to Max, who had lowered his body until he lay flat on the floor, ears soft, posture gentle, every line of him radiating safety. Slowly, the girl pressed her small fingers through the cutout, brushed his fur, and whispered, "Mr. Bill said police don't care about kids like us." Olivia's throat constricted with fury. She wanted to tear Richard Hale apart with her bare hands. Instead, she whispered, steady, deliberate, "Mr. Bill was wrong. I care. I came for you." The girl swallowed hard, then whispered, "My name's Lily." "Lily," Olivia said softly, fighting tears. "That's a beautiful name. Step back for me, sweetheart. I'm going to open this door." Her fingers shook against the cold metal latch. But the bolt slid easily, too easily, and when the door creaked open, the child stepped out like a deer leaving cover, movements, slow, rehearsed in fear. Lily hesitated only an instant before she collapsed against Max, burying her face in his fur. The German shepherd stayed perfectly still, letting the small body press into him, letting sobs shake through his frame. Olivia's chest split wide with grief and relief, and for a moment she let herself imagine it was Sophia in her arms, before the thought cut too deep and she shoved it back down. Morrison's voice came rough from behind. "We've got more." Olivia moved to the next cell, fingers fumbling with the bolt. One by one she opened them. Emma, red-haired, fever bright in her eyes, coughing so hard her small frame shuddered. Tyler, clutching a one-eyed teddy bear, eyes vacant, lips pressed tight as though silence were his only shield. Marcus, older shoulders squared like a protector, guiding the younger twins, Michael and Sarah Beth, who clung to each other with hands white-knuckled. 6 children in total. Ale, fragile. Staring at her with a mixture of terror and tentative hope, Olivia keyed her radio with shaking hands, her voice cracking into command. Unit 29, 6 minors located, ages approximately 6 to 12. 1 in urgent medical distress. Request paramedic entry immediately. The reply crackled, but she barely heard it over the rush of her blood in her ears. The children huddled instinctively around Max, their hands brushing his fur as if he were the only real thing in the nightmare around them. The dog lay down calm, letting them approach at their own pace, his brown eyes patient and solemn. Even Tyler, who kept his teddy clenched to his chest, edged closer until the stuffed bear touched Max's paw. Olivia's heart throbbed. She crouched among them, her badge catching faint light, her throat thick with emotion she could hardly contain. "You're safe now," she whispered. "You're safe." But inside, a voice whispered the crueler truth, safe for them, not for Sophia. Not for the girl who had been gone 10 years. Morrison's hand touched her shoulder, his grip heavy. "We need to move. The scene's hot. This isn't finished." Olivia nodded, but her eyes never left the children clustered against her. The secret behind the mirror was no longer an architectural oddity. It was the raw face of human cruelty, a place where innocence had been hidden like contraband, a place where childhood had been measured in whispers and fear. And yet, in their eyes, in their trembling hands, reaching for Max, she saw something else survival. The corridor had concealed them, but it had not broken them completely. And as paramedics thundered down the hall, as Morrison began barking orders into his radio, Olivia pressed a trembling hand to Max's fur and whispered to herself the only vow that mattered: not one more ghost. Not tonight. The chamber seemed to pulse with the sound of breathing, shallow, rapid, uneven breaths echoing from 6 small chests, each one fragile and strained. Olivia Carter felt the air thicken around her, as if the walls themselves held the weight of suffering. The flashlight beam quivered across the crude plywood partitions, catching details that carved themselves into her memory. A pink blanket stiff with dirt, a plastic doll missing one arm, crayons worn down to nubs scattered across the floor. These were the traces of lives forced to shrink into boxes, the residue of children who had been taught to whisper instead of sing, to flinch instead of laugh. Lily clung to Max's neck, her thin arms trembling as though holding on to him was the only anchor she had left in a world that had swallowed her whole. The dog didn't move. Not a twitch, his body solid and steady against her weight. Olivia reached out, brushing Lily's tangled hair back from her face, and felt the heat of fever, not from Lily, but from the red-haired girl slumped in the next cell. Emma. The child's cough rattled like dry paper. Her lips tinged with gray, her eyelids drooping with exhaustion. "Please." Marcus's voice cracked beside her, the boy already stepping into the role of guardian. His shoulders squared, his jaw tight, his eyes darting between the twins, he shielded behind him, and Emma swaying at the threshold of collapse. "She's sick. She needs a doctor." Olivia squeezed her radio so hard, her knuckles ached. Unit 29 reporting 6 minors located, ages 6 to 12, 1 in urgent medical distress, respiratory infection suspected. Request immediate paramedic entry. Her voice was professional, clipped, but inside her heart screamed with urgency. The reply crackled back through static, the dispatcher promising medics en route. But the words barely penetrated Olivia's focus. All she saw were the children, 6 pairs of eyes, reflecting fear and confusion. 6 small bodies marked by captivity. She crouched lower, meeting their gazes one by one. You're safe now. We're going to get you out. Tyler, the boy clutching the battered teddy bear, didn't answer. He pressed himself against the wall, his eyes wide and hollow. Olivia recognized the look instantly. The gaze of someone who had been waiting too long for rescue. Someone who no longer trusted the world to offer safety. Max shifted closer, lying down in a careful line beside Tyler, close enough to be felt, but not so close as to frighten him. After a long minute, Tyler lowered the teddy bear until its worn fur brushed Max's paw. The dog blinked slowly, tail flicking once a wordless acknowledgement. Olivia's throat constricted. This was what healing looked like, fragile, tentative, impossibly brave. Morrison's flashlight beam cut across the space as he moved methodically, photographing the crude cells, collecting details that would one day anchor charges in court. His jaw was clenched so tight, the muscle in his cheek twitched. This wasn't improvisation, he muttered. This was built with intent. Months, maybe years of planning. Olivia barely heard him. She was focused on Emma, whose cough deepened each spasm, shaking her frail body until she sagged against the plywood. Olivia caught her, lowering her gently to the ground. "Stay with me, sweetheart," she whispered. "Help is coming." Emma's eyelids fluttered. "It's cold," she murmured. Olivia stripped off her jacket and wrapped it around the girl, holding her close, while Max pressed his nose against Emma's hand. The child's fingers twitched weakly, brushing his fur, as though drawing strength from its warmth. The twins, Michael and Sarah Beth, edged closer, eyes darting with suspicion. They looked so small, 6 years old, maybe, yet already carried the posture of survivors, scanning for threats, moving in sync as if rehearsed. Olivia smiled softly, though her lips trembled. "You're very brave," she told them. The girl blinked and whispered, "Mr. Bill said families don't want kids like us." Olivia's chest burned. She forced her voice even. He lied. "Your family's never stopped looking for you." The words felt like both truth and prayer. She wished someone could say the same to her about Sophia. Footsteps thundered in the corridor, voices calling through the narrow passage. Paramedics burst into the chamber, their kits clattering against the floor, their voices firm and urgent. The children flinched, huddling instinctively around Olivia and Max, their fragile trust balanced on the edge of collapse. Olivia raised a hand quickly. "It's okay. These people are here to help." Emma was laid onto a stretcher, oxygen tubes fitted to her nose. The twins were wrapped in blankets, their small frames trembling under the weight of sudden attention. Marcus resisted until Olivia promised she would walk beside him. Lily refused to let go of Max's fur until Olivia assured her he would follow. Tyler was coaxed out only when Max stood and walked beside him. The dog's steady presence stronger than any words. One by one, they were carried toward the light of the store above, away from the suffocating dark that had been their world. Olivia followed last, her legs weak, her chest hollow. Every step upward felt like carrying the weight of their stolen months, their stolen innocence. When they emerged into the brightness of Walmart, the contrast was blinding. Yellow tape sectioned off the store officers, stood guard the air thick with questions from detectives and crime techs. But Olivia saw only Richard Hale standing cuffed between two uniforms, his khaki shirt damp with sweat, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. The moment Marcus was wheeled past on his stretcher, he lifted his head and pointed with trembling certainty. "That's him. That's Mr. Bill." The words sliced through the chaos, shattering any remaining illusion. Olivia's vision tunneled. For an instant, she saw Hale not as a middle-aged manager, but as the monster who had stolen childhoods and buried them behind plywood. Her hand twitched toward her weapon. Morrison's grip on her shoulder was iron. By the book, he warned, his eyes drilling into hers. By the book. Olivia wanted to burn the book, to rip it apart, and write a new one in blood and rage. but Max pressed against her thigh, grounding her. She exhaled slowly, unclenching her fists. Hale's lips moved. His voice was soft, almost tender, carrying words that chilled her blood. I was protecting them. Protecting. He dared to call this protection. Olivia's nails bit into her palms until she tasted iron at the back of her throat. Max growled low and primal, the sound vibrating like thunder through the fluorescent air. The children on stretchers turned their heads at the sound. Even cuffed Hale flinched, his eyes widening for the first time in true fear. Paramedics rushed the children out. Morrison barking orders, crime scene techs photographing every inch of the hidden chamber. Olivia remained rooted, her heart swinging between triumph and torment. They were alive. 6 children had been saved. 6 families would soon hold them again. But every face she saw blurred with Sophia's every sob of relief from a parent she imagined as her own, every reunion a knife twisting in the wound that never closed. As the last stretcher disappeared through the sliding doors, Olivia dropped to her knees beside Max. She pressed her forehead against his fur, tears stinging hot at the corners of her eyes. "We did good," she whispered, though her voice cracked under the weight of longing. Max shifted closer, his tail thudding once against the floor, his body anchoring her against the tidal wave of ghosts pressing at her chest. The chamber behind the mirror had given up its secret. But Olivia knew the darkness reached deeper still. Hale's eyes had held conviction, not panic. He believed what he had done was righteous. That belief terrified her more than any cage or bolt. Because if he believed, then this was not improvisation. It was obsession. And obsessions rarely ended with 6. The fluorescent lights of the store glared down with sterile indifference, bright enough to bleach color from faces sharp enough to expose every twitch of guilt or fear. Richard Hale stood cuffed near the customer service counter, flanked by 2 uniformed officers who kept their grips tight on his arms. His khaki shirt clung to him with sweat, his collar darkened with damp. He looked less like a man trapped by law and more like someone clinging to a private sermon, lips moving faintly, as though reciting prayers no one else could hear. Olivia Carter stepped toward him. Max pressed against her thigh, the leash trembling with the dog's low growl. Hale's eyes flicked briefly to the German shepherd, then away, a wince betraying what his lips refused to. Even monsters could feel fear when met with a predator who could smell the truth. Marcus's accusation still echoed in the air. "That's him. That's Mr. Bill." The words had landed like a gavel, unrefuted, clear. Officers had stiffened, Morrison's jaw had locked, and the children had been whisked toward waiting ambulances. Now the world had narrowed to the man at the counter and the storm circling around him. "You're under arrest," Morrison's voice was heavy, practiced, stripped of emotion. He read Hale his rights in a monotone that had steadied murderers, thieves, and liars for decades. But this time his throat tightened around the last phrase. "Anything you say can and will be used against you." Hale lifted his head slowly. His glasses had slid down the bridge of his nose, reflecting the harsh light. His eyes, pale and watery, locked on Olivia. "You don't understand," he said, voice calm, almost gentle. "I was protecting them." Olivia felt her fingernails bite into her palms. Protecting. The word dripped with poison. She wanted to scream at him, to ask if Emma gasping for breath was protection, if Lily's whispers of abandonment were protection, if Tyler clutching a ragged teddy bear in silence was protection. But she held her jaw tight, grinding rage into control. Max's growl filled the silence, low and steady. His teeth bared just enough for Hale to flinch again. Morrison signaled, and the officers began walking Hale toward the doors. Cameras flashed outside, reporters already swarming like vultures tipped off by scanners or whispers. The sliding glass parted and the night air rushed in cool and sharp, carrying with it the clamor of questions hurled by voices desperate to frame tragedy into headlines. Is it true children were found? Was this man their captor, Detective Carter? How many victims? Olivia kept her gaze forward, her hand steady on Max's harness, ignoring the barrage. The children deserved silence before spectacle. The truth would come in time, but not here under fluorescent light and camera lenses. Not while their small bodies still trembled under hospital blankets. Hale's calmness unnerved her. He didn't shrink from the cameras. He straightened shoulders back, chin lifted as though stepping into some twisted martyrdom. "I saved them," he announced, suddenly voice rising above the chaos. "Their families didn't care for them. I gave them safety. I gave them order." The words punched through the noise, silencing even the reporters for a beat. Olivia's stomach turned. Morrison barked an order, shoving Hale into the back of a cruiser, slamming the door hard enough to rattle glass. The crowd surged, voices multiplying, but the car peeled away, taking Hale into custody. For a moment, the night air was still. Olivia drew a deep breath, steadying herself. Max leaned against her, the warmth of his body grounding her against the fury spiraling inside. She whispered to him, not caring who overheard. "We've got him, boy. We've got him." At the precinct, the atmosphere thickened with adrenaline and unease. Hale sat in an interrogation room, wrists still cuffed, a paper cup of water untouched before him. Through the one-way glass, Olivia watched arms crossed Max at her heel. Morrison stood beside her, rubbing a hand across his jaw. "He's not panicked," Morrison muttered. "Not even rattled. He believes every word he says." Olivia's eyes never left Hale. His lips moved faintly again, like silent prayers. "He doesn't believe, Henry. He knows." Morrison frowned. "Knows what? That what he built wasn't an accident. He's rehearsed this story, wrapped it around himself like armor. He's convinced himself he's the savior, not the jailer. That's why the children repeated his words. He's been feeding them a gospel of lies." Her voice cracked at the edges. She remembered Lily's whisper. "Mr. Bill said police don't care about kids like us." The venom of indoctrination planted in soil of fear. Morrison nodded grimly. "Then we break through the armor." Olivia unclipped Max's leash. "He already has." They entered the room together. Hale looked up slowly, his gaze skipping Olivia and landing on Max. The shepherd's amber eyes fixed on him, unblinking, unyielding. Hale shifted in his chair, a flicker of discomfort cracking his veneer. "You've been accused," Morrison began, voice professional, "of unlawfully confining 6 minors in a concealed room beneath your store. The charges will include kidnapping, child endangerment, and abuse." "Do you understand the seriousness?" Hale smiled faintly. "Words. Legal words. You see cages. I see sanctuaries." Olivia stepped forward, fists clenched at her sides. "Sanctuaries don't leave children coughing blood in the dark. Sanctuaries don't teach them to fear the sound of their own name." Hale turned his gaze to her, at last eyes pale and strange. "Detective Carter, you of all people should understand. The world is cruel. Families abandon. Children suffer. I gave them order. I gave them shelter." Olivia's chest burned. She wanted to lunge across the table to tear his words from the air. But Max shifted closer, pressing against her thigh, steadying her breath. She leaned into that strength. "You stole them," she said softly, evenly. "You replaced their voices with your own. That isn't shelter. That's theft." Hale's smile faltered for a heartbeat. His fingers twitched against the tabletop, then his voice sharpened. "They will thank me. In time. They will understand I saved them." Olivia slammed her hands against the table, leaning in her voice a blade. "They already told me the truth. They asked if we were really police. They asked because you told them no one cared. And then they saw Max. They saw us, and they knew you were lying. Hale blinked. His lips pressed tight. For the first time, silence filled the room. Morrison's eyes flicked to Olivia, a nod of approval. The crack had appeared. Olivia straightened, pulling in a deep breath, letting the fury cool into something sharper. She wanted to scream, but she knew screaming wouldn't shatter Hale's armor. Truth would. She lowered her voice to a whisper, leaning forward again. You didn't protect them. You couldn't even protect your own family. Hale's face twitched violently. His jaw clenched. His eyes darkened with sudden storm. Olivia pressed on, ruthless. Your son, Jacob. Cancer took him. Your wife, Jennifer. She took herself. And you decided to build a kingdom of ghosts to fill the silence. But those children aren't your ghosts. They're alive. And they will never thank you for the prison you made. Hale's chest heaved fury and grief colliding in his pale face. His hands jerked against the cuffs, the metal rattling sharp. For a heartbeat, Olivia thought he might scream. Instead, he lowered his head, voice hoarse. You don't understand. They needed me. Max growled again low and vibrating the sound of final judgment. Hale flinched visibly, his shoulders curling inward for the first time. The shepherd didn't move closer, didn't bare his teeth. He simply stared, unwavering the weight of primal truth pressing through the air until even Hale's delusion cracked. Silence spread thick in the room. Olivia exhaled slowly, her hands trembling with the restraint of not tearing into him. The arrest was complete, but justice was only beginning. Hours later, paperwork stacked high. Olivia stepped outside into the night. The cool air brushed against her face, smelling faintly of rain. Max walked at her side, tail low, but steady eyes still bright from the hunt. Olivia crouched, pressing her forehead to his whispering, what she couldn't tell anyone else. We saved them, but he's not done. There's more. I can feel it. Max licked her cheek, once a small gesture grounding her. She breathed him in the scent of fur and earth and truth, and for a moment the weight on her chest eased. Richard Hale was in custody, but his words haunted her. I saved them. I protected them. He believed it. And that belief was a crack leading deeper into tunnels not yet unearthed, into graves not yet opened. Olivia knew this arrest was not an ending, but a doorway. The secret behind the mirror had only been the first whisper of the darkness. She rose, gripping Max's leash, her spine straight against the night. We're not finished, she murmured. Not until every child is brought back into the light. Max's ears twitched, his gaze fixed forward, as though he already knew the path waiting ahead. The interrogation room was too small for the ghosts it now contained. The walls were painted a dull gray, meant to neutralize emotion, but the air vibrated with tension. Richard Hale sat shackled at the table, wrists bound in steel posture, unnervingly relaxed. His khaki shirt clung damp to his chest, his glasses sat crooked on his nose. Yet he carried himself as though the world outside had not collapsed. His pale eyes, sharp and watery, moved with the calm of a man convinced he was still in control. Olivia Carter stood opposite him, arms folded tightly, Max at her heel. The German shepherd's low growl hummed like a motor in the silence. Morrison leaned against the wall with a notepad expression locked in the mask of a career detective, though his jaw worked as if chewing glass. The recorder on the table clicked on. Olivia began. State your name for the record. Richard Allen Hale, he said easily, as if announcing himself at a church social. Occupation store manager. 23 years. His lips twitched with pride. Olivia's eyes narrowed. You've been charged with the unlawful confinement and kidnapping of 6 minors. Do you understand the charges? Hale leaned back slightly, chains clinking. I understand the words, but you misunderstand the meaning. Meaning? Morrison's voice was low, warning. Hale's smile spread faintly. You see cages? I see protection. Those children, they were abandoned by the people who should have loved them most. Families that shouted at them, struck them, left them alone at night while they drowned in noise and chaos. I saved them from that. I gave them peace, order, safety. Olivia felt her teeth grind together. Safety. Emma coughing blood, Lily whispering doubts, Tyler clutching his teddy bear like a lifeline. This man dared to call that safety. She leaned forward, voice clipped. They were sick, hungry, terrified. Do you call that peace? Hale's gaze didn't falter. Children always resist discipline at first. But once they learned the rules, once they understood my system, they calmed. Did you see the drawings on the wall? Did you see how tidy their beds were? That is proof. They thrived. Olivia slammed her fist against the table, the sound cracking like thunder. Max barked once sharp and commanding, making Hale flinch. Morrison's hand shot up in silent caution. But Olivia didn't retreat. Her voice cut like glass. They weren't thriving. They were surviving. And the difference is the size of the grave you were digging for them. For the first time, Hale's face twitched, lips tightening. But his voice recovered soft, almost soothing. Detective, I know you carry pain. I read it in your eyes. You lost someone too, didn't you? That's why you fight so hard. That's why you can't see what I did. I know the ache of loss. I lost Jacob. Do you know what it feels like to hold your child's hand while cancer eats him alive? Do you know what it feels like to come home and find your wife hanging in the closet because she couldn't bear it anymore? The words slammed into Olivia's chest, cruel in their precision. She staggered inside, though her stance never shifted. He was right. She did know loss, though not in his shape. Sophia's disappearance was its own form of hanging her life suspended in absence. For a flicker, Olivia almost saw him as a grieving father, almost heard the faint resonance of her own pain in his voice. But then she remembered Lily's question. Are you really police? And the fragile cough of Emma, and the illusion shattered. Yes, Olivia said, voice low, trembling with contained fury. I know that pain, and I know what it can do to a person. It can either make you fight to protect others, or it can rot you from the inside until you inflict your wounds on them. You chose rot. Hale's jaw flexed. His eyes grew sharp. No, I chose purpose. Jacob was innocent. He deserved better. Jennifer was weak. She took herself out. I couldn't save them. But I could save others. I could make sure no child felt the chaos of being unloved again. Olivia leaned closer, her face inches from his. By chaining them in darkness, they weren't chained. His voice rose, cracks spidering through the calm. They were sheltered. Families are noisy, parents fight. They scream, they drink, they forget their children. I gave those kids rules, structure, quiet. They slept without fear. Olivia's fists clenched. She wanted to shout, but she steadied her tone into steel. Emma couldn't breathe. Tyler doesn't speak. Lily doesn't know if the police care about her. That's not quiet. That's trauma. That's you. Hale's nostrils flared. His fingers twitched against the cuffs, rattling metal. They'll see in time. Children always resist their saviors at first. But they'll remember me. They'll remember I gave them order. Morrison slammed his notepad shut. You gave them hell. And hell doesn't forget either. Silence pressed heavy. The hum of the fluorescent light above buzzed like an insect. Olivia stared at Hale, watching the last shreds of calm peel away to reveal the raw, twisted conviction beneath. He wasn't breaking because he believed too deeply in the lie he had built, and in that belief was something far more dangerous than guilt certainty. Hale's voice dropped suddenly, almost a whisper, eyes glinting. And those 6 are only the beginning. The words chilled the room. Olivia's stomach lurched. Morrison stiffened. What do you mean? Olivia demanded, her heart racing. Hale's smile returned slow, thin, grotesque. You think you've won because you pulled 6 from my care. But there are others. You'll find them, I'm sure. You'll open boxes. You'll dig places you never thought to look, and when you do, you'll understand this wasn't cruelty. It was preparation. Olivia's blood iced. Max barked again, sharp, his body quivering with alarm. She grabbed the leash, steadying him, but her gaze never left Hale. Where she spat. Where are they? Hale leaned back, eyes half-lidded, as though in prayer. In time. You'll see. They're already safe where I placed them. Safer than they ever were in the world outside. Morrison snapped an order, ending the interview. The recorder clicked off with a harsh pop. Officers stepped in to escort Hale back to holding. He rose slowly, chains rattling his lips, still shaping silent words like benedictions. As he passed Max, the shepherd lunged forward with a bark so loud it rattled the glass. Hale flinched, his composure breaking for a fraction of a second, and Olivia seized on that weakness, leaning in voice like fire. They don't belong to you, she hissed. Not anymore. Not ever again. For once, Hale didn't answer. He was dragged out, his shadow swallowed by the hallway. The room sagged into silence. Olivia sank into a chair, her body trembling with exhaustion and rage, her face buried in her hands. Max pressed his head against her knee, solid grounding, the only steady thing left in a world splintered by Hale's twisted confession. Morrison stood in the corner, shoulders heavy, his voice rough. If he's telling the truth, we're not at the end. We're at the middle. Olivia lifted her head, eyes burning. Then we keep going. We dig every grave. We open every box. We don't stop until we've pulled every last child out of the dark. Max thumped his tail once eyes locked on her, as if he already knew that this vow would consume them both. The twisted confession still echoed in the room, a poison that would drive them forward. Hale thought he was untouchable, a savior misunderstood. But Olivia carried something he didn't. The relentless hunger of a mother who had already lost once and could not lose again. The precinct never truly slept. But after Hale's confession, the air inside turned leaden, as though every breath carried weight. Olivia Carter sat at her desk, with files spread like shattered glass, her eyes burning from hours without rest. Max lay curled at her feet, chest rising and falling, but his ears twitched with every sound. Even asleep, he was vigilant, as if the poison of Hale's words had seeped into his blood as deeply as hers. There are others. The phrase circled her mind, relentless as a siren. Hale hadn't said it with the bravado of a liar. He had said it with the calm assurance of a man announcing the sunrise. That made it worse. She could still see his pale eyes, half-lidded in prayer, his lips moving around words meant to sanctify cages. He believed himself holy. And holy men were the hardest devils to fight. Morrison entered the bullpen with a stack of documents under his arm, his shoulders slouched under invisible weight. He dropped the files on her desk, dust blooming. Fairfield County, he said flatly. He signed multiple storage leases there over the last 6 years. Units in different names, but the handwriting's the same. The words scraped across her chest. Fairfield. She repeated the name, tasting of rust. A county an hour away, mostly forgotten farmland dotted with warehouses too old to attract attention. A place where no one asked questions, where secrets could fester unseen. She flipped through the documents, her hands tightening with every lease signed, every invoice paid in cash. Each slip of paper was a ghost calling from beneath the dirt. her throat constricted. "We need warrants. All of them. Now." Morrison rubbed his jaw. "Judge will push back on blanket warrants. We'll have to prioritize." Olivia's fist slammed the desk before she could stop herself, the sound snapping through the bullpen. Max lifted his head instantly, eyes sharp. "Prioritize," she hissed. "You heard him. He as much as admitted more kids are out there. Every second we waste is a second we risk evidence getting tossed in court." Morrison cut in sharply. His eyes softened a beat later. "I want those kids as badly as you do Carter. But we don't get to kick in every door just because we're angry. We do this clean. We do this right. Angry." The word stung. She wasn't just angry, she was haunted. Every photograph of a missing child in those files blurred with Sophia's face. She saw her daughter's butterfly backpack. In the margin notes her blonde hair in the photocopied images. The ghosts pressed so close she could hardly breathe. Max nudged her knee with his nose, grounding her. She unclenched her fists, forced herself to inhale. "Fine. But Fairfield is where we start. Tonight." Morrison hesitated, then nodded. Tonight. The drive out was swallowed by silence. The cruiser's headlights carved pale tunnels through the dark countryside, rows of skeletal trees flanking the road. Olivia sat rigid in the passenger seat, one hand resting on Max's harness in the back. The dog stood the whole way, nose pressed to the window, as if he knew they were heading towards something buried. Fields stretched endless and empty. The kind of landscape where screams could scatter into the wind and vanish without trace. Olivia watched the blur of darkness outside and felt the tightness in her chest grow. Fairfield was the kind of place predators chose deliberately too far, for neighbors too forgotten for questions. Morrison's voice finally broke the silence. "You ever think about how a man like Hale blends in for decades, Sunday barbecues, 9 to 5 job nods to neighbors? Nobody looks deeper. Nobody wants to." Olivia's voice was raw. "People see what doesn't disturb them. Anything else they look away. Until Max doesn't." She glanced back at the shepherd. His eyes gleamed in the reflection of headlights, unwavering, steady. She felt her throat tighten with gratitude that bordered on reverence. He never looked away. The warehouse squatted at the edge of Fairfield, its bricks cracked and faded white, its windows sealed with plywood scrawled in graffiti. The metal doors were scarred with rust, the lock thick and industrial. The air smelled of damp earth and neglect. Max stiffened the instant Olivia stepped out of the car. His hackles rose, his nose thrust forward, body rigid, as if the ground itself whispered danger. He pulled against the leash, dragging her closer, nails scraping across gravel. Her stomach dropped. The dog didn't hesitate. He knew. Morrison's flashlight swept across the padlock, heavy duty, brand new. Somebody wanted this sealed. Or wanted it sealed until they came back, Olivia muttered. She crouched beside Max, stroking the fur bristling along his neck. "Show me," she whispered. The shepherd shoved his nose against the seam of the door, whining high, pawing hard. His entire body vibrated with alarm, his growl low and guttural. Olivia's chest hollowed. She straightened. "We're not waiting. Get the lock cut." Morrison cursed, but waved the bolt cutters forward. The metal shrieked under pressure, snapping like bone. The lock clattered to the ground. The doors groaned open, exhaling a stench so foul it staggered them backward, disinfectant layered over decay, the suffocating sweetness of death poorly hidden. Olivia's stomach lurched, bile rising in her throat. Max barked furiously, straining forward, as though trying to drag the truth into light by force. The beam of her flashlight sliced through dust and shadow. 4 massive wooden crates stood in the center of the room. Their surfaces stained lids bolted shut. Scratches marred the edges, claw marks gouged deep into wood. Olivia froze breath, trapped in her chest. The room was silent except for Max's escalating barks and the thunder of her own heart. Morrison whispered, voice hoarse, "Oh God." Olivia stumbled closer, her flashlight trembling over the crates. One lid bore faint crayon drawings, stick figures in childish scrawl. Her knees buckled, horror flooding her veins. These weren't storage containers. They were coffins masquerading as beds. "Open them," she choked out. Morrison shook his head. "Carter, open them." The crowbars screeched against nails, wood splintering. The first lid groaned loose. Olivia's light fell inside. A blanket. A stuffed animal. Empty. She sagged with hollow relief. But then the second lid came free. Inside lay the remains of a child, bones fragile and collapsed under stained fabric, a lock of dark hair still clinging to a skull. Olivia's legs gave out. She dropped to her knees, a sound breaking from her throat that was part sob, part roar. Max pressed against her, whining high, pawing at the crate as if trying to pull the child back to life. The third crate opened. Another set of bones. The fourth. Another. The warehouse was not storage. It was a tomb. Olivia clutched Max's fur with trembling hands, burying her face against him, her tears spilling into his coat. "Too late," she whispered. "Too late." Morrison's voice shook behind her. "We've got multiple deceased miners, evidence of long-term concealment. God help us." Olivia forced herself to look again, to memorize every detail. They deserved witnesses, not silence. She thought of their families, of empty chairs at tables of birthdays never reached. She thought of Sophia, her daughter's absence pressing into the hollow space left by these bones. The ghosts were multiplying. By dawn, the warehouse was sealed evidence teams crawling through its shadows. Olivia stood outside in the cold gray light, her face hollow, her eyes rimmed red. Max leaned against her leg, exhausted but alert, his fur coated in dust. Morrison smoked silently nearby, his hands shaking. "We've got names," he said, finally, voice brittle. "Jessica Martinez, Timothy Chen, Maria Santos, David Kim. All reported missing in the last 5 years. All written off as runaways. Nobody connected the dots." Olivia's stomach clenched. Runaways. The convenient category where society stuffed its guilt. Easier to believe children chose to vanish than to admit monsters walked freely among them. She wrapped her arms around herself, her body cold even under layers. Hale's voice echoed in her skull. "There are others?" He had spoken truth, not threat. And if there were these 4, then how many more? She looked down at Max, who lifted his head and met her gaze with steady, unwavering eyes. She bent, pressing her forehead against his. "We can't stop now," she whispered. "We don't stop until the last grave is open." Max's tail thudded, once solemn, his body pressed firm against hers, as though lending her his strength. The shadow of Fairfield stretched long behind them, but Olivia knew it was only the first. Hale's darkness was wider, deeper, more suffocating than she had ever imagined. And she would walk into every shadow, every hidden room, every warehouse and grave, until the last child was pulled from it. The warehouse was silent now, sealed in yellow tape and guarded by uniformed officers who shifted uneasily in the pre-dawn cold. Olivia Carter stood just inside the yawning door, the smell of the place still clinging to her clothes, her skin, her lungs. It wasn't a smell that left it buried itself under the skin like guilt. The crates loomed in the center of the room, 4 hulking wooden shapes that had once held children as surely as graves, and though the lids had been pried open, the air still pressed down as if something inside refused to release its hold. Max sat close at her side, his chest rising and falling in shallow bursts. He hadn't stopped whining since the discovery, a thin, pained sound that cut through her bones. The shepherd had pressed his nose to each crate after they were opened, circling, pawing, as if refusing to accept that these were not children waiting to be led into the light. but remains that had long since passed into silence. Olivia had to drag him back by the harness, tears stinging her eyes as his nails scraped furrows into the concrete. He was built to find life, not corpses, and the truth weighed on him like it weighed on her. The coroner's team moved carefully gloved hands, lifting fragments of fabric. Small bones, brittle strands of hair. Cameras clicked flashes, slicing the gloom. Each burst capturing a detail no one wanted to remember, but no one dared to forget. Morrison hovered near the crates, his face ashen, his voice hoarse as he dictated notes. Crate 1 empty. Crate 2, juvenile remains female, approximate age 8 to 10. Crate 3, juvenile remains male, approximate age 9. Crate 4, juvenile remains female, approximate age 6. Crate 5. He broke off, swallowing hard because there was no crate 5. Only 4. Only 4, and yet 4 too many. Olivia forced herself closer, each step dragging as if she carried iron on her ankles. She needed to see, needed to carve the images into her memory, because the dead deserved witnesses who would not look away. Her flashlight beam fell across the interior of the second crate, over the small skull tilted to one side, over the faded fabric of a once pink dress, now stained dark. A stuffed rabbit lay beside the bones, its ears frayed, one eye missing. She clamped a hand over her mouth, choking on a sound that was both sob and scream. She saw Sophia's rabbit in that box. She saw her daughter's absence crystallized in bone. Max pressed against her leg, whining, sharp pawing the air as though trying to climb into the crate. Olivia crouched, her hand trembling through his fur, anchoring herself to his warmth. "I know, boy," she whispered, voice raw. "I know." Morrison's hand touched her shoulder, heavy with shared weight. "We'll get them identified," he said. "We'll get them home." Home. The word twisted in her gut. There would be no homecoming for these children, only funerals, only boxes lowered into the ground a second time. The forensic techs moved methodically, lifting each bone with reverence, placing them into bags labeled with numbers instead of names. Olivia hated that part, the stripping of identity into evidence. But she also knew it was the first step toward justice, the only path left for those who could no longer speak. She forced herself to study the crates themselves. Heavy construction, nailed tight, reinforced corners. Not random. Built with care, with precision. Scratches gouged the inside lids, long and desperate. Tiny fingernails had carved those marks. She reached out her fingers, hovering over the wood, tracing air above the grooves, without touching. She could feel the children's panic pressed into the fibers, their last resistance etched in splinters. Morrison muttered. He didn't just confine. He experimented. He tested. Some survived long enough to be moved to Walmart. Others? His voice trailed off. Olivia's jaw clenched until her teeth ached. He buried them alive in wood and called it protection. The coroner looked up. "We'll need to transport the remains immediately. Temperature's unstable and contamination risk is high." Olivia nodded numbly. She watched them close the evidence bags, watched the crates stand hollow and empty, stripped of the fragile bodies they had hidden. For a moment, the emptiness seemed worse than when they were full. At least before the crates had screamed truth. Now they stood mute like the missing, whose names she didn't yet know. The morning light filtered weakly through cracks in the plywood windows, painting pale stripes across the floor. Dust floated in the beams, like restless spirits. Olivia sank to her knees beside Max, pressing her forehead against his. He pressed back firmly, grounding her, his breath hot and steady. "They're not forgotten," she whispered into his fur. "Not anymore." Her throat closed as she thought of their families, Jessica Martinez's mother still setting a plate at the table. Timothy Chen's father, staring at a soccer field every weekend. Maria Santos's siblings whispering her name at night. David Kim's grandparents lighting candles every year. They had been dismissed as runaways, as statistics, as lost causes. But now, there would be truth. Brutal, shattering truth. And still Hale's voice echoed. There are others. By the time the remains were loaded into vans, the warehouse felt emptier than the grave it had been. Olivia walked outside, the cold air cutting her lungs. Reporters clustered behind barricades, microphones stretched like spears, voices clamoring. Detective Carter, how many victims? Were they all children? Is Richard Hale connected? She ignored them, eyes fixed forward. The children deserved dignity, not headlines. Morrison caught up, his face carved in stone. We'll hold a press conference tomorrow. For now, we focus on the families. Olivia nodded, but said nothing. Her mind wasn't in Fairfield anymore. It was with Sophia. Her daughter's room, still untouched, her backpack, still hanging by the door, her laughter still echoing in dreams. For a decade she had lived with not knowing. Now, staring at the wooden coffins, she wondered which was worse, absence or certainty. Max nudged her hand, pulling her back. She looked down into his eyes, saw the same unrelenting truth he had given her since Michael's death. He had never lied to her. He had never stopped pulling her toward the hidden, no matter how much it hurt. We're not done, she said aloud, more to herself than anyone else. We keep going. We find them all. Morrison exhaled smoke into the cold morning. Then we dig deeper. Hale didn't build just one graveyard. Olivia closed her eyes, the image of the crates burning into her mind, the scratches etched forever in her memory. She thought of the children in the hospital that night, Lily, Emma, Tyler, Marcus, the twins, fragile but breathing, clinging to Max for strength. She thought of the bones in the boxes, the ones who never made it into light. And she thought of Sophia always. Sophia, her absence, a coffin without wood, a silence without end. The wooden coffins of Fairfield were not the end. They were a message left behind in splinters and dust. Hale had planted his darkness across counties, across years, like seeds. Olivia felt the chills seep into her bones, but she gripped Max's harness, grounding herself in his warmth. We'll dig every box open, she whispered. We'll bring every ghost into the light. Max's tail flicked once, solemn, his body leaning into hers, as though sealing the vow. Behind them, the warehouse sagged in the gray dawn, its crates empty, its shadows heavy, a monument to what had been hidden and what still waited to be found. The briefing room was packed, the air suffocating with the weight of what had been pulled from Fairfield. Photographs lay spread across the table, grainy images of the wooden crates, the scratches inside the lids, the fragile bones laid out on white cloth. Each photo was a wound, and the wounds kept multiplying. Olivia Carter sat at the far end, Max pressed against her leg, his steady presence the only thing keeping her spine upright as voices filled the room. Detectives argued, crime techs reported, the coroner listed preliminary findings in a monotone that tried and failed to sound detached. Victims identified by dental records, the coroner said, sliding papers forward. Jessica Martinez, age 9. Timothy Chen, age 10. Maria Santos, age 7. David Kim, age 8. All reported missing within the last 5 years. All cases closed as probable runaways. The words landed like stones. Runaways. It was always the easy label, the one that absolved Parents Police Society from looking deeper. Children vanish every day, and when their faces fade from posters, the world calls it choice. Olivia's nails dug crescents into her palms. Max shifted, pressing his head into her knee as though sensing the storm in her blood. Morrison's voice cut through the murmur. Richard Hale's leases tie him directly to all 4 storage units. The handwriting's his. Payments made in cash, no bank trail. He knew exactly how to stay invisible. Another detective leaned forward. We found toys and clothing in a 5th unit across town. No remains but heavy traces of bleach. He was preparing another site. The room stilled. Preparing. The word hung like a noose. Olivia's throat tightened. Hale hadn't stopped. The 6 children found at Walmart were survivors not by mercy, but by timing. He had been building more spaces, planting more graves. And if they hadn't listened to Max, if the dog hadn't barked at the mirror, those 6 would be photographs on a table too. Her hand tightened on Max's fur until he whined softly. She forced herself to breathe, forced the rage into words. We need to reopen every missing child case in the Tri-County area. Every runaway, every abandonment, every file that got shelved. Hale was hunting in plain sight, and we let him vanish into paperwork. A murmur rippled. Some nodded, others shifted uncomfortably, but no one disagreed. The truth had left no room. The district attorney entered, then her face pale, her voice clipped. We're pursuing murder charges in addition to kidnapping. But we'll need airtight evidence to make this stick. Hale is already claiming he acted as a protector, not a predator. His defense will lean on psychological trauma and delusion. We need to dismantle that narrative completely. Olivia barked a bitter laugh. Delusion doesn't build crates with reinforced corners. Delusion doesn't forge leases under false names. He knew what he was doing. The DA's eyes met hers. Then prove it. Prove intention, not just action. Olivia felt heat burn her chest. Prove intention. As if the scratches inside the lids weren't proof enough, as if the bones of children weren't testimony. But she swallowed the rage because she knew how trials worked. Monsters weren't defeated by fury. They were defeated by evidence. Max growled low, his amber eyes fixed on the photos, as if even he understood that the dead were begging for justice louder than the living. Later, in the quiet of the records room, Olivia pulled files one by one from dusty shelves. Reports with missing dates, photographs curled at the edges, names scribbled in fading ink. She laid them out across the table, faces staring up at her. Dozens of children, their eyes frozen in the grain of school portraits, their smiles brittle with innocence. She studied each one, her chest constricting. Jessica, Timothy, Maria, David, now matched to bones. But how many others had been filed away under the easy label? How many had Hale reached before anyone noticed Sophia's photo lay among them? She had slipped it into the pile years ago, a reminder, a curse. Her daughter's gap-toothed smile stared at her, the butterfly on her shirt, a flash of color in a sea of gray. Sophia wasn't one of Hale's, at least not by evidence. But absence knew no boundaries. Olivia's heart squeezed until it hurt. Max padded to her side, resting his muzzle on the table edge, his eyes sweeping the photographs as if memorizing them. Olivia stroked his head, whispering, "Find them, boy. Help me find them." She didn't mean in Fairfield. She meant everywhere. The next day, the press conference unfolded in a storm of cameras. Morrison stood at the podium, his voice heavy. 4 deceased minors identified at a Fairfield storage site. 6 rescued from a concealed chamber at a local Walmart. Richard Hale is in custody, charged with multiple counts of kidnapping, unlawful confinement, and homicide. Questions fired like bullets. How long were the children held? Was Hale working alone? What failures allowed this to happen? Olivia stood off to the side with Max shielding the dog from the chaos. Reporters tried to angle microphones toward her, calling her name, shouting about the shepherd who had found the chamber. She ignored them, her hand steady on Max's harness. The children's faces deserved silence, not spectacle. But one question cut through, sharp and merciless. "Detective Carter, do you believe there are more victims?" Her throat closed. Every instinct screamed to answer yes. Hale's words echoed. "There are others." She could see the crates, smell the bleach, hear the whine in Max's throat. She could see Sophia's photo staring at her from the file. She forced her voice calm, even as it trembled inside. "We will not stop searching until every child is accounted for." It wasn't yes, but it was truth. That night in the hospital ward, Olivia walked the rows of beds where the 6 rescued children lay. Lily clutched Max's fur as he padded gently beside her bed, refusing to sleep without the dog near. Emma dozed fitfully under oxygen, her cheeks pale but her breathing steadier. Tyler sat in silence, teddy bear in one hand, his other hand resting lightly on Max's back as if tethering himself to the present. The twins curled together under a blanket while Marcus hovered nearby, still trying to shield them all, even as exhaustion dragged at his shoulders. Olivia stood among them, her chest aching. Survivors. Not statistics, not bones in crates. Survivors who would need years to heal but alive. She whispered to herself, to Max, to the ghosts. "We saved these. We'll save the rest." Max wagged his tail once, quiet, solemn. She turned to leave her steps heavy. In the hallway, Morrison waited, his expression carved from stone. "The truth's out now," he said. "No more shadows? No more secrets?" Olivia shook her head. "No. The truth's only just begun to show its face. We haven't uncovered all of it yet." Morrison frowned. "You think Hale's holding back more?" She met his gaze, her own eyes hollow with certainty. "I don't think. I know." Max growled softly beside her, as if agreeing, as if confirming what her instincts already screamed. The truth revealed was only a fraction, a cruel glimpse. The rest waited in deeper graves, in darker rooms, in files still marked runaway. Olivia squared her shoulders, her jaw tightening. "We keep digging, every box, every shadow, until there's nothing left for him to hide behind." The shepherd pressed against her leg, steady, unwavering. Together, they stepped out into the night, carrying the weight of the truth, not as relief, but as a command. The courthouse loomed behind Olivia like a fortress, but her steps carried her in the opposite direction. She wasn't walking toward testimony or evidence this time. She was walking toward the children, toward the fragile flicker of hope that had survived Richard Hale's cages. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and old air conditioning, a place where sorrow and healing rubbed shoulders in every hallway. Olivia pushed open the ward door quietly, Max padding at her side, nails clicking softly on tile. The German shepherd's ears twitched forward the instant they entered, and 6 pairs of eyes turned toward him, fragile faces lighting with recognition. Max Lily's voice was barely more than a whisper, but it carried enough force to make the girl sit up straighter in her bed. Her arms stretched out before Olivia even reached her, and Max climbed close, resting his head on her lap with infinite gentleness. The girl's thin fingers tangled in his fur as though she was weaving herself back into the world. Emma sat propped against pillows nearby, her cheeks no longer gray, but flushed faintly with returning warmth. The oxygen tube still curled under her mouth, but her breathing had steadied. She lifted a hand, shaky but determined, and Max leaned toward her too. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, the first Olivia had seen. Tyler, silent as always, didn't move at first. But Olivia noticed his grip on the teddy bear had loosened. He slid one hand free and placed it lightly on Max's back. His eyes didn't meet Olivia's, but for the first time, they didn't stare into a void. They rested, still haunted, but resting. The twins lay curled together under a blanket, Michael's arm wrapped protectively around Sarah Beth. They peered at Olivia as though testing the air. She crouched to their level, her voice soft. "How are you holding up, Sarah?" Beth whispered. "We dreamed it was dark again." But then Max barked, and the dark went away. Olivia's chest ached, her throat closing around tears. She brushed a strand of hair from the girl's forehead. "That's because Max never stops watching. He'll bark as long as you need him to." Marcus stood apart near the window, his shoulders squared in the posture of someone much older than his years. He had appointed himself protector long before the police came, and now he didn't know how to put the burden down. Olivia walked to him, resting a hand on his arm. "You don't have to carry it all anymore." His jaw tightened. "If I don't, who will?" "You let us," she said gently. "You let me. You let Max. That's how you carry it now, together." The boy's eyes flickered toward Max, who glanced back, ears pricking. For the first time, Marcus's stance softened just enough that his chest rose on a shaky sigh. Olivia stood in the center of the room, looking at them all. 6 children. 6 souls pulled from a grave that had nearly claimed them. They bore scars, physical and unseen, but they were breathing. They were beginning to laugh, to whisper, to reach for touch. That was hope, fragile, but alive. Her gaze dropped to Max, who sprawled across Lily's lap, now tail thumping faintly as the children's hands combed through his fur. He accepted their weight without complaint, his body a bridge between their nightmares and something steadier. Olivia knelt beside him, pressing her cheek against his neck. "You gave them this," she murmured. She thought of the wooden crates in Fairfield, of the 4 names matched to bones, of the endless files still waiting to be reopened. The dead would never return. The ghosts would always whisper. But here in this ward, hope lived. The children proved that even in the deepest dark, something could still be pulled into light. Lily's voice cut through Olivia's thoughts. "Detective Carter?" Olivia looked up. "Are we safe now?" The word stabbed sharper than any knife. Olivia could not promise absolute safety. She couldn't banish the shadows Hale had seeded across counties, couldn't erase nightmares. But she could offer truth steady and unflinching. "Yes," she said softly with conviction. "You are safe now. And I swear to you we'll keep it that way." Max barked once, sharp and sure, as if sealing the vow. The children startled, then giggled, the sound small but real. It filled the sterile ward like sunlight breaking through blinds. Olivia closed her eyes and let the sound sink into her bones. It didn't erase the coffins. It didn't silence Hale's voice in her memory. But it gave her something else to hold, something worth fighting toward. The case was far from over. Courtrooms and evidence files and graves still waited. But tonight, standing in a hospital room filled with children who were breathing, laughing and clutching Max's fur as though it were life itself, Olivia let herself believe in the smallest, fiercest truth. The weeks that followed blurred into hearings, testimonies, files stacked higher than walls. But Olivia Carter carried one image through it all. The children's laughter in the hospital ward, small and fragile, yet louder than the echo of Richard Hale's lies. That sound was her compass. Hale sat in custody, his twisted gospel crumbling under the weight of evidence. His voice no longer thundered now. It muttered, brittle, echoing only in the confines of his cell. The world outside had stopped listening. Instead, it listened to the children, to survivors who were slowly reclaiming breath and space. Olivia spent her evenings at the hospital. She watched Lily draw pictures of fields, Emma play with blocks, while coughing less each day, Tyler whisper a single word, Max, for the first time. The twins began to separate just enough for Sarah Beth to giggle, while Michael scowled protectively. Marcus still stood guard, but now he leaned on Olivia, on Max, learning the weight didn't have to be carried alone. Each small victory was stitched with sorrow for the ones lost in wooden coffins. Yet Olivia began to understand something she had resisted for years. Grief could be carried not just as burden, but as fuel. Sophia's absence would always ache, but that ache could drive her forward, keep her from ever turning away when a child's face appeared on a flyer. Max became more than a K-9 partner. He became a living symbol for the town. Families came to the hospital just to see him, to let their children press tiny hands into his fur. He stood still for each of them, patient, steadfast, as though he understood that healing was not measured in days, but in moments of trust. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hospital windows, painting the ward in orange light, Olivia stood in the doorway watching the children play around Max. For the first time in months, her chest loosened. Morrison came to stand beside her, his voice low. "You've turned a crime scene into a place of healing." Olivia shook her head, eyes never leaving the children. "They did that themselves. All we did was pull them out of the dark." Morrison lit a cigarette but didn't smoke it, letting it burn in his hand. "What about you?" Olivia touched the locket around her neck. Sophia's picture pressed warm against her skin. "I'll never stop looking for her. But these kids, they remind me what's left is worth fighting for. Even if I never find Sophia, I can make sure someone else gets their child back." Max barked once sharp and certain tail wagging as if sealing the vow. The children laughed, chasing the sound as if it were a spark. Olivia smiled faint, but real. Pain had not vanished, it never would. But it had been reshaped, transformed into something fierce, something unbreakable. It had become hope, and hope was enough to light even the darkest corridors.